I hadn't been back here since Margaret passed. Couldn't bring myself to. The place had become a mausoleum, too full of echoes, too empty of life. After her funeral, I packed a few things and left it alone. Rented a modest place across town, 1 bedroom, no stairs, quiet neighbors. I told myself it was easier that way. But this morning, something got into me. I woke up thinking about that damn apartment. Maybe it was the way the sun hit the blinds. Maybe it was just the silence I woke up to. I didn't have much of a plan, just figured I'd dust the shelves, open the windows, maybe fix that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. Keep my hands busy, keep my mind from drifting to places I didn't want it to go. I didn't even knock. It's my place. Or, it was. The door opened smoother than I expected. Margaret used to remind me to oil the hinges twice a year. I stepped into the hallway, and froze. Voices. I heard voices. Not faint ones from the street, not the old building settling. Laughter. Conversation. The clink of glass against glass. Shoes on tile. My gut dropped. I moved slowly, instinctively quiet, like I'd stumbled into a stranger's home. And in a way, I had. I rounded the corner to the living room and saw them, Daniel, my son. His wife Claire. Her parents, Mark and Evelyn Ross. All of them inside. Unpacking boxes. My boxes. Daniel was crouched beside the coffee table, his sleeves rolled up like he was setting up for brunch. Claire stood by the fireplace, dusting a picture frame with the edge of her sweater. And Evelyn, Evelyn, was pulling books off my shelf, rearranging them like she was auditioning for some home decor show. Mark was sipping something from a tumbler and nodding at the ceiling like he owned the view. Daniel noticed me first. He stood up and locked eyes with me. Not a flicker of guilt. No shame. No surprise. "Dad," he said, like this was normal. Like I was the one who needed to explain myself. I didn't speak. I didn't move. My hands were still on the strap of my tool bag, the one I'd used for 40 years, longer than he's been alive. "You don't live here anymore," Daniel said evenly. "We've decided it's ours now." The air went out of me. Claire shifted beside him, her arms crossed, like she was bracing for a tantrum. Evelyn didn't even look up. Mark offered me a tight smile, like a landlord greeting a tenant who'd overstayed his lease. I blinked, trying to make sense of the words. "We've decided." Not asked, not discussed, just decided. Like I was a piece of furniture they'd dragged to the curb. "Excuse me," I finally said. Daniel's voice didn't flinch. "You haven't lived here since Mom died. You can't even be here without falling apart. You said that. Remember?" I remembered. I remembered a night 6 months after the funeral when I tried to sleep in our bed and ended up on the floor. I'd told him that during one of our rare phone calls. I hadn't expected him to weaponize it. "You didn't ask," I said, my voice low, more out of disbelief than control. "You just moved in." Claire stepped forward. "It makes sense, Walter. The apartment was sitting empty. We need space. My parents need space." Mark raised his glass slightly, like this was a toast. "Beautiful spot, really. Lot of character." "You," my voice caught. I had to force the next words out. "You had a key." "Of course I had a key," Daniel said. "You never changed the locks. It's not like we broke in." That was it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some family confusion I could smooth over with a long talk and a beer. This was betrayal, pure and brazen. I took one last look around. My leather chair, now covered with Claire's throw pillows. The photo of Margaret and me on our honeymoon, replaced with a framed print of some abstract watercolor nonsense. The bookshelf, once alphabetized and lovingly dusted by Margaret every spring, now picked over like a garage sale. "You're not welcome here," Daniel added, as if I hadn't gotten the message. "It's better this way." I turned without another word. Walked out. Let the door shut behind me as quietly as it would allow. Down the stairs, out the building, into the street where the city air hit me like a slap. I stood on the curb, hands still wrapped around my tool bag, trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. I looked up at the window where Margaret used to hang little stained glass charms that caught the sun in the morning. They were gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It felt like the end of something. But deep in my gut, beneath the humiliation, the heartbreak, the sheer disbelief, something else was forming. Something older. Sharper. This wasn't over. I didn't remember the walk back to my truck. I must have moved on instinct, each step powered more by shock than by muscle. It wasn't until I sat in the driver's seat and heard the door shut with that familiar, heavy thunk that the silence truly landed. The kind of silence that wraps around your throat. I sat there with the engine off. My hands rested on the wheel, but I didn't grip it. I just stared ahead, windshield catching the reflection of that building, the one where my wife and I started our life. The one where Daniel took his first steps. The one where, just 20 minutes ago, my son told me I didn't belong. My keys jangled when I finally started the truck. That sound, so small and ordinary, was the only thing that felt real. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Not yet. I just drove. My flat was only 20 minutes away, but the trip felt longer, like the roads had stretched overnight. I parked in my usual spot and walked up the stairs, ignoring the creak on the fourth one that always warned me I was gaining weight. The key turned easily in the lock. Funny how some doors still welcomed you. Inside, the air was cool and stale. I hadn't opened the windows that morning. I'd left in a rush, thinking I'd be gone an hour, maybe two. Clean up a little. Dust some shelves. Instead, I came home a trespasser in my own life. I dropped the tool bag by the door and walked straight to the kitchen. The photo of Margaret was there, just where I'd left it. Framed in silver. Smiling with the same patience she always showed when I'd forget to wipe the counter or overcook the roast. I sat down across from her. My fingers found the edge of the frame and held on like it could anchor me. I didn't say anything at first. Just stared. Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. I stared at it for 2 rings. Then 3. On the 4th, I answered. "Hello." His voice was calm. Measured. Too calm. "Hey. I figured I should call so we're clear on everything." I said nothing. He went on. "I wasn't trying to upset you earlier, Dad. I just... Claire and I talked, and we think it's for the best. The apartment, it's not doing you any good." My grip on the phone tightened. I could hear the breath in his voice, the controlled way he was pacing himself. "You can't live there, Dad. You said it yourself. Too many memories. Too much space. Why let it rot?" "You mean, why let it sit empty so you could move Claire's parents in?" I asked flatly. There was a pause. "That's part of it," he said. No shame. No hesitation. I could feel something shift inside me. Daniel continued, "Look, Mark and Evelyn are getting older. Their lease is up next month. It makes sense for them to have a stable place. You've got your new flat. You're doing fine. It's not like you even want the apartment." I leaned back in my chair. Margaret's photo seemed to look straight through me. "And what about me?" I asked. "What about you? Where do I fit in this plan of yours? Did you ever think to ask? Or did you just figure I'd hand it over like everything else you've asked for over the years?" That did it. His voice dropped a degree. "Dad, you're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. He sighed, the kind of exhale you use when you think someone's being unreasonable. You always made things more complicated than they needed to be. You gave me money when I needed it. Helped with the wedding. Co-signed the first loan. You said it was because we were family. And I meant it, I said. Well, this is the same thing. A gesture for family. I didn't think you'd make it weird. My hand shook slightly. Not from weakness. From restraint. And this is how you treat family. You walk into my apartment without asking, unpack your in-laws, and then tell me I don't belong. You don't live there anymore, he said coolly. Let's not pretend otherwise. And honestly, it's not like you have much use for it. You're old. You're alone. Why hang on to a place that just makes you sad? That last line, you're old, you're alone, landed like a punch to the ribs. Not because it was untrue. But because of the way he said it. Like it excused everything. I didn't answer. Claire and I will handle the utilities, he went on. We're getting the locks changed next week. I swallowed hard. You don't have the right to do that. I do now, he said. We've already filed for a shared lease. I had power of attorney from when you had the surgery last year, remember? Still active. That wasn't true. But it told me everything I needed to know. Enjoy your place, Dad. We'll take care of the apartment. I hung up. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then laid the phone down gently next to Margaret's picture. For a minute, maybe two, the silence pressed in again, thick and heavy like storm clouds before a downpour. And then I stood up. Walked to the drawer in the hallway. Pulled out an old black notebook, the kind I used when I was still doing contracting work. And on the first blank page, I wrote 5 words. They will never forget this day. There's a certain kind of stillness that settles in after betrayal, not the loud kind that comes with shouting and broken plates, but the kind that wraps around your ribs like wet cloth. That's what it felt like the next morning. Not rage. Not even grief. Just silence. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking. The photo of Margaret stared back at me from her silver frame. Same smile. Same eyes. Same reminder of everything I used to know. I reached out and turned the frame slightly. Just a little to the left. Then a little to the right. Then back again. Nothing felt right. I'd been a builder my whole life. Spent 4 decades shaping homes from empty dirt and poured cement. Framing the future, one plank at a time. I'd worked with my hands until they turned to leather, and even now, at 67, I still carried that itch in my bones, an instinct to fix things. But I couldn't fix this. I reached for the black notebook I'd pulled from the drawer last night. It was worn around the edges, full of old job sketches and lumber calculations I'd scribbled over the years. I flipped to the first empty page again. 5 words stared back at me in thick, dark ink. They will never forget this day. At the time, I hadn't meant it as a threat. Not really. It was more of a promise. A declaration to myself. Because I knew something had broken yesterday, something that couldn't be glued back together. My own son looked me in the eye and told me I was old, alone, and unnecessary. And maybe part of that was true. But I wasn't weak. And I damn sure wasn't disposable. I flipped to the next page and began to write. Not a plan. Not yet. Just memories. The first time Daniel scraped his knee on that apartment floor. Margaret had rushed to the bathroom for antiseptic while I sat on the carpet with him, holding him steady, wiping his tears. He couldn't have been older than 5. That was his first real injury, and his first lesson in how pain teaches you things. Another page. His high school graduation. Margaret made lasagna from scratch. I bought him a cheap wristwatch he never wore, but he hugged me for it anyway. Said he'd wear it to job interviews. Another. The night he told me he was marrying Claire. I'd had reservations about her, more than a few. Not because of how she spoke or dressed, but because of the way she looked at me. Like I was an antique. Something her future husband would outgrow. I'd said nothing. Smiled through it all. Because I thought I was building something by staying quiet, peace, maybe. Or family. I was wrong. The next hour passed in a fog. I flipped through old bills. Rental statements. Found the deed to the apartment in an envelope labeled mortgage, paid. Margaret had circled the last payment with a red pen and written freedom in the margin. I stared at her handwriting for a long time. That looped F. She always had nice penmanship. That apartment was never just real estate. It was 29 years of our life. It was where I carried her across the threshold after we married. Where Daniel took his first steps. Where she died. And now it had been taken from me without a second thought. My phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. We've had the locks changed. I left a few of your old tools in the garage. Let me know if you want me to drop them off. I didn't respond. I turned the notebook sideways and began sketching. Not a floor plan. Not blueprints. Something else. A simple outline of the apartment. Each room, each hallway. The ventilation shafts. The light fixtures. The old fuse box in the laundry closet that no one had touched in years. My mind kicked into gear. Slowly, steadily, the builder in me began to return. If he thought I was too old to fight back, he'd forgotten who raised him. I didn't raise him with fists or fury. I raised him with patience, with structure, with discipline. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't flinch when something breaks. The kind that rebuilds, silently, precisely, until you no longer recognize what came before. Daniel thought he was playing chess. But I was a carpenter. And carpenters don't bluff. We build. The rest of that day was spent in silence. I didn't turn on the TV. Didn't answer the phone when Claire called. I knew she'd leave a message, but I didn't listen. I didn't need more noise. I took a walk around the block. Let the evening air fill my lungs. Watched the sunset bleed across the rooftops like a brushstroke. In another life, Margaret would have had her arm looped through mine, telling me about her students or asking what I wanted for dinner. Instead, it was just me. But even that felt temporary now. Because something had shifted. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was planning. By the time I got back inside, the sun had dipped beneath the trees. The living room filled with shadows. I poured a glass of water, sat back at the table, and wrote one more sentence in the notebook. If they think I've surrendered, they haven't been paying attention. 2 days passed after the call. 2 days since Daniel told me, flatly, that I didn't need the apartment anymore. Since he changed the locks. Since he mocked the silence that still clung to me like old wallpaper. I didn't tell anyone. I let the calls go unanswered, ignored the world like it was background noise. Because what I needed was time. And someone who still understood how to take a spark of an idea and turn it into something solid. That's where Leo Martinez came in. Leo and I go back almost 40 years. We met on a job in Mesa, building out a new addition for a public school. I laid the foundation. He wired the walls. Back then he had a full head of jet black hair and a mouth that didn't know how to whisper. The man could talk a mile a minute about circuit load and current limitations and never lose track of what he was doing. Now he's retired, like me. Lives out near South Ridge in a workshop that smells like solder and wood polish. A place full of half-finished inventions, blinking lights, and wires that snake across the ceiling like vines. He was the first and only person I called. Walter Hayes, Leo said as soon as he answered. You better not be asking me to fix your damn toaster again. It's not a toaster, I said. It's a request. He paused. That your, I'm about to do something stupid voice? It's my, I've got an idea voice. Another beat of silence, and then, come by. Leo's place sat behind a chain-link gate with a homemade sign that said, trespassers will be electrified, seriously. I pulled up and parked next to an old Crown Vic with its hood open. The front door was already ajar. Inside, it smelled like hot plastic and oil. His workshop was chaos to the untrained eye, but I knew better. Everything had its place. He looked up from a circuit board and raised an eyebrow. Well. You look like shit. I smiled. Good to see you too. He pulled off his goggles and tossed them on the table. Beer or coffee? Neither. I need your brain. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. Now I'm scared. I took a breath and laid it all out, the apartment, Daniel, Claire, her goddamn smug parents. The locks. The tone in Daniel's voice when he said I was too old and too lonely to need it anymore. I told him everything. Leo didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he whistled low. Shit. That's cold. Colder than I expected, I said. But I'm done waiting around. I'm not going to break windows or torch the place. I want to get smart. I want to make that apartment fight back. Leo rubbed his chin. You mean like a haunted house? I gave a half smile. No, I mean like a goddamn war zone. But subtle. Enough to scare the hell out of them. Nothing illegal. Just, psychological. He grinned. You want chaos with plausible deniability. Exactly. He stood and motioned me to follow. Then let me show you what I've been working on. Leo's lab wasn't just for fixing broken lamps and building radios. He had drawers full of sensors, speakers the size of a penny, thermal detectors, motion-triggered light arrays. Stuff you couldn't buy off the shelf. Some of it he built from scratch. Others he'd borrowed from his consulting days and never gave back. He showed me a system he'd wired into a mannequin, eyes that flickered red when someone walked within 6 feet, a chest that emitted a low mechanical hum. Scared the hell out of my neighbor's dog, he said proudly. I laughed. We won't need that. But can you make something less visible? He grinned. Try me. We got to work. Over the next week, we spent long nights at his shop and then made careful trips to the apartment when we knew they were out. Daniel and Claire both had jobs. She was a corporate consultant, he worked from home but spent most days at the gym or bouncing between coffee shops. We tracked their movements, looked for patterns. Claire's parents were out often, too. Gallery visits. Brunches. Evelyn had a weekly bridge group. Mark was always playing golf. It gave us just enough time to slip in through the old basement maintenance door, the one the building never updated because no one used it. Leo set to work while I stood lookout. We installed motion-triggered lights behind the air vents, small strobes that would flicker white-blue whenever someone walked through the hallway. Not enough to blind, just enough to disorient. In the guest bedroom closet, Leo mounted a tiny projector that would cast a faint silhouette on the far wall, human-shaped. Just tall enough to make you do a double-take. It would activate at night, only after 11 p.m., and only if the closet door was closed. Speakers were placed in the vent shafts, no louder than a whisper. Leo pre-recorded sounds, soft footsteps. Faint breathing. A woman humming something that didn't sound quite like a song. And the faucets, those were my favorite. Leo rigged the valves with tiny solenoids, programmed to trigger when someone walked past the hallway bathroom at night. A sudden gush, no warning. To the naked eye, the apartment was untouched. To someone living inside, it was a goddamn haunted battleground. We finished by the end of the week. Everything rigged, tested, and set on timers with a remote control backup I could access from my phone. I stood in the living room one last time. My living room. Margaret's houseplants had been tossed out, replaced with something artificial. The walls had new art, soulless abstract blobs Claire probably paid too much for. But they hadn't changed everything. They hadn't changed the bones. I looked at the ceiling fan I'd installed in 2002, still humming silently above. I looked at the archway between the kitchen and dining room, a cut I'd made myself with a jigsaw on a cold Sunday afternoon. Leo came up beside me, wiping his hands on a rag. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked. I nodded. "They started this." He handed me the remote, a small black box with a single switch. "Then make sure they finish it." They moved in on a Friday. Not Daniel and Claire alone, oh no, they brought the whole damn circus. Claire's parents arrived first, all polished smugness and pristine luggage. Evelyn's heels clacked on the hardwood like she was inspecting a hotel suite. Mark whistled as he stepped inside, already making himself at home. Daniel followed a few minutes later, arms full of groceries. Claire trailed behind, balancing a soy latte in one hand and a tablet in the other. She didn't even look around, just barked orders over her shoulder like a CEO redecorating a corporate condo. I watched it all unfold from the parking garage, eyes just high enough to peek over the half-wall. A thermos of coffee sat beside me, untouched. They weren't just staying for the weekend, they were settling in. Daniel had told me they needed a bit of time to rearrange things. Judging by the way Evelyn directed movers and Mark set up his laptop at my old desk, rearrange meant occupy. And that suited me just fine. The system Leo and I rigged had been quiet all week. No early triggers, no malfunctions. It was a sleeping beast, and tonight, it would wake. That evening, I waited. I paced. I went over the checklist in my notebook twice. Lights. Audio. Water triggers. Projector. Everything was in place. At exactly 10:12 p.m., I got the first confirmation. The motion sensor near the kitchen picked up movement. Claire, probably, she had a habit of late-night snacking, always claimed she couldn't sleep without her bedtime banana. I opened the remote access panel on my phone and tapped in the sequence. The hallway lights pulsed, just once, then flickered off. A moment later, the kitchen faucet hissed to life. Not a drip. Not a leak. A full-force burst like someone cranked it wide open and vanished. Claire shrieked. Not a scream. A sharp, clipped sound, the kind you make when your brain hasn't caught up to what your body's telling you. I could hear the shuffle of feet, voices overlapping. "Was that you?" Daniel asked. "No. It just turned on by itself." Mark's voice was calm, but annoyed. "Must be faulty plumbing." Evelyn murmured something about old buildings, and they all shuffled back to their rooms. Good. Let them rationalize it, for now. At 1:06 a.m., I activated the second sequence. The speakers in the vents whispered to life. A soft exhale. 3 footsteps. Silence. Then a woman's voice, barely audible, humming a few bars of "Danny Boy." That was Margaret's favorite song. And it's the one Claire had banned at their wedding, claiming it was too old-fashioned. I smiled. From the baby monitor Leo had snuck into the utility closet, I heard Mark whisper, "Did you hear that?" Evelyn answered with a shaky, "It's the neighbors." It has to be. Daniel didn't say a word. I waited another 30 minutes before the projector kicked in. The silhouette flickered across the guest bedroom wall, faint but unmistakable, a tall figure standing just outside the closet door. Not moving. Not breathing. Just watching. Evelyn saw it first. The scream that tore out of her throat shook the baby monitor so hard it crackled. Someone's in the house. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Daniel shouted for Claire to check the front door. Mark cursed loudly, accusing someone, maybe me, of breaking in. Evelyn cried. I mean really cried. Not out of pain. Out of sheer, paralyzing fear. And then came the best part, the front door wouldn't open. Leo and I hadn't locked it. We didn't need to. The deadbolt was functional. But when the light strobed again in the hallway and the voice in the vent said, clearly and slowly, you shouldn't be here, Daniel lost it. He pounded on the door. Tried every key in his pocket. Claire screamed that they needed to call the police, but none of their phones had signal. Another thing Leo had taken care of, a signal jammer, legal in short bursts and timed perfectly. They were trapped in a perfectly normal apartment. But they weren't in control. By 2:30 a.m., the chaos had peaked. Mark had pulled the fire extinguisher off the wall and was standing guard in the living room like he expected a burglar to come charging out of the walls. Evelyn sat on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, trembling. Claire refused to leave the bathroom, claiming the mirrors felt wrong. And Daniel paced the hallway with a flashlight, pointing it into corners like that would stop what he couldn't see. I waited until the fear simmered down, when the adrenaline had drained, and their logic tried to return. Then I hit them one last time. Every light in the apartment flickered in unison. The vents whispered the same phrase 3 times, this is not your home. And then, silence. Total, suffocating silence. The kind that doesn't comfort, it compresses. And one by one, they fled. Daniel was first. He practically kicked the front door open once the signal jammer released and his phone buzzed back to life. Claire followed, still holding her tablet like a shield. Evelyn clung to Mark's arm as they hustled down the hallway and out of my building like rats from a sinking ship. By dawn, the apartment was empty. I stood across the street, leaning on a lamppost, watching as Claire backed their SUV out of the lot. The rear window was fogged from their breath, their fear still clinging to the glass. They didn't look back. They never saw me. And I didn't need them to. This was the first strike. And it landed exactly where it needed to. They were gone less than 24 hours before Daniel called. I didn't answer. He rang again 10 minutes later, and then again. On the third try, I picked up. Not out of mercy, but curiosity. I wanted to hear what fear sounded like coming from the same voice that told me I didn't belong. He didn't even wait for a hello. You think this is funny? I leaned back in my chair, coffee warm in my hand. I'm not sure what you mean. The apartment, he snapped. Don't play dumb. I haven't been there, I said, evenly. He barked a joyless laugh. Don't give me that crap. Lights going crazy, weird voices, shadows on the wall, what the hell did you do? I paused. Let the silence hang. Daniel, I said. That apartment is over 30 years old. Buildings make noises. Lights flicker. Pipes groan. Cut the shit. He was panicking, but trying to mask it behind anger. Classic Daniel, when he doesn't understand something, he throws volume at it. You think you can scare us out, he hissed. You think this little stunt makes you clever? Clever? I repeated. No. Just prepared. He was breathing hard now. Claire's parents are threatening to sue. They think the place is unsafe. You're going to pay for that. That's a bold claim, I said, calm as a lake. I don't own the building. And if you're talking about haunting, good luck proving it. He didn't respond right away. You went too far, he finally muttered. You embarrassed us. That word. Embarrassed. I nearly laughed. Embarrassed? Like I'd shown up at his dinner party uninvited, wearing a bathrobe. Not like he'd walked into my home, took it without asking, and told me to get lost. I'll make this simple, I said. You moved in without permission. Now you're spooked and trying to shift blame. You don't want to live there. Good. Leave. You don't get to win this, Dad, he said, quieter now. More venom, less volume. Then came the threat. I knew it was coming. You keep this up, and I'll make sure people know who you really are, he said. The bitter old man who went off the rails. I'll tell everyone. Family, friends. We'll go public if we have to. I waited. Are you finished? I asked. Yeah. Then don't call again, I said, and hung up. That night, I pulled the notebook back out. Flipped to the page where I'd sketched the apartment layout. Most of the systems were still armed, but I powered them down. They'd served their purpose. Fear was planted. Now it needed space to grow. I turned to a fresh page and began writing again, not diagrams this time. Plans. Legal ones. Because if Daniel wanted to play games in public, then it was time I started tightening the screws in private. The next morning, I called Judith Sloan. Judith isn't flashy. She's not one of those fast-talking attorneys with cufflinks and fake grins. She's the kind who reads every clause, digs into every footnote, and doesn't blink twice at documents 6 inches thick. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she remembered Margaret and asked how I was holding up. Judith, I said. I want to move the apartment into a charitable trust. Say more, she replied. I laid it out simply. I wanted the apartment out of Daniel's reach. Permanently. I didn't trust him not to try something else, legal pressure, manipulation, maybe even a sale behind my back. And more than that, I didn't want the apartment just sitting there, a war zone waiting for another siege. I wanted it to matter again. I told her about a nonprofit I'd read about, Safe Haven Housing. They help displaced veterans and widows. People with nowhere to go. Margaret would have loved that. She used to collect winter coats for shelters. She'd leave them at the foot of our bed every December, tags still on. Judith listened. Took notes. And when I finished, she said 3 words that changed everything. I can do that. Over the next week, Judith drafted the paperwork. The apartment would go into an irrevocable charitable trust, gifted to Safe Haven with a clause that guaranteed me lifetime honorary access. Not ownership, access. I wouldn't live there again. But I'd always have a key. A seat at the table. And once it transferred, Daniel couldn't touch it. Not through pressure. Not through legal threats. Not even if he showed up sobbing with a bouquet in one hand and a forged deed in the other. It would be out of reach. For good. The day we finalized the transfer, I walked past the building one last time. The windows were dark. I didn't go in. Didn't need to. I'd already walked through it enough in my head. I knew where every outlet sat, every creaky floorboard, every nail I hammered down with Margaret laughing behind me. It wasn't mine anymore. Not on paper. But that was the point. Sometimes you don't win by reclaiming what's yours. Sometimes you win by giving it away to someone who'll use it better than the thief ever could. 2 days later, Judith called me again. They've scheduled a meeting, she said. Daniel, Claire, the parents. They want to contest the transfer. I've agreed to let them come in. I nodded. Let them scream. Judith's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted textile building, red brick, big windows, and the kind of silence that felt earned. You could tell the place used to echo with machines and shouting and sweat, but now it was all framed certificates and soft lighting. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit. Sit with your back to the wall, never look rushed. I took a seat across from the large oak table and waited. The paperwork was already laid out, neatly stacked, every line initialed, every clause ironclad. The transfer had gone through 2 days earlier. As far as the city, the IRS, and the state registrar were concerned, the apartment no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Safe Haven Housing. What was once a home, then a battleground, was now a haven. And I wasn't just free. I was untouchable. At 10:01, the door opened. Daniel walked in first, jaw clenched, trying to look composed but falling short. Claire followed, a folder in her hands, her lips already pursed. Evelyn and Mark were last. He looked bored, like this was beneath him. She looked offended just to be in a room that didn't offer lemon water. Judith rose, extended a firm hand. "Thank you all for coming." Claire didn't shake. Evelyn gave a tight nod. Mark sat down without a word. Daniel didn't sit right away. He stared at me like I was a smudge on the glass. "This is what you wanted," he said. "To humiliate us?" "No," I said. "I just wanted my home back. But since that ship sailed, I found something better." Claire opened her folder and slid a document across the table. "We've had legal counsel review this," she said. "We think there's a way to reverse the transfer. Especially considering Walter's age and medical history. It could be argued he wasn't fully competent." Judith smiled without warmth. "That would be a serious accusation, and a losing one. Mr. Hayes underwent a medical competency screening 2 days before the transfer. The certificate is notarized and on file." Evelyn scoffed. "You expect us to believe this was all above board? This was a revenge stunt. That apartment was family property." "No," Judith replied calmly. "It was personal property, fully paid off by Mr. Hayes and his late wife. No joint ownership with their son, no legal heirs involved. He had every right to do what he wished with it." Mark finally spoke, his voice low and annoyed. "This is about pride. That place could have stayed in the family. Instead, you handed it off to strangers." Judith slid a second document across the table. "Not strangers. Safe Haven Housing. A federally recognized nonprofit. They provide transitional housing for veterans and widows. Which, frankly, seems more appropriate than squatting in a dead man's living room." I didn't flinch. But Daniel did. His hands curled into fists on the table. "You'd rather give it to them than your own son," he said. "To people you don't even know." I looked him dead in the eye. "Family doesn't take what isn't theirs. Family doesn't lock you out of your own home and call it a favor." Claire cut in. "You abandoned that apartment. You said you couldn't be there anymore. You told us." "I told you it was painful," I interrupted. "I didn't say it was yours." Evelyn sneered. "So what now? You're a hero because you gave it away. What's the plan? Go brag to your buddies that you outsmarted your kid?" "No plan," I said. "Just peace. And maybe a few good people get to sleep under that roof instead of being told they're in the way." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You think this makes you righteous? You just wanted to hurt us." Judith's voice was calm, but iron. "Mr. Hayes didn't need revenge. He needed distance. And the law agrees with him." Claire leaned back, eyes narrow. "We'll go public." Judith didn't blink. "Then I'll be happy to release the security footage from the day you moved in without consent, used a copied key, and tampered with utility bills. We'll see how the press responds to that." Dead silence. For the first time in years, I watched Daniel realize he wasn't holding the cards. He looked to Claire. She didn't meet his eyes. He looked to his in-laws. Evelyn's mask cracked just slightly, enough for the cold to show underneath. Mark looked at the floor. "You can leave now," Judith said. They didn't move. So I stood. "You may not believe this," I said, "but I don't hate any of you. I'm disappointed. I'm angry. But I don't hate you." Daniel shook his head. "You're just an old man with too much pride." "Maybe," I said. "But I sleep just fine." They left without another word. After the door closed, Judith let out a quiet breath. "They'll back off," she said. "They don't have the stomach for a real fight." "I know," I said. I looked down at the document again. The deed, signed and sealed. The apartment belonged to a cause now. A place that once held my marriage, my memories, and my grief would hold someone else's story. It felt right. It felt final. 3 days passed. No more calls. No more threats. Just silence. That should have been a relief, but I knew better. The quiet wasn't surrender, it was regrouping. A dog that stops barking isn't done fighting. It's just learning your rhythm. So when Judith called and said Daniel had requested a final meeting, I didn't hesitate. I told her to schedule it. Not because I needed closure. I already had that. I needed him to see what consequences looked like when they showed up in person, calm, grounded, and wearing a tucked-in shirt. It was raining that morning. A slow, steady drizzle that made everything feel more honest. No drama, no thunder. Just a city crying slow tears on the sidewalks. I arrived first. Judith had reserved the conference room again, same oak table, same quiet warmth. A carafe of water sat in the middle like it mattered. It didn't. This wasn't about refreshments. At 10:06, they arrived. Daniel looked exhausted. Not like he'd lost sleep, like he'd lost certainty. Like the ground beneath his feet had finally proven it could crack. Claire came in beside him. Hair up, jaw set. Still clinging to control. And then Evelyn and Mark, trailing like ghosts. This time, there was no fake cheer. No smug smiles. They'd dressed like people expecting a funeral, not a negotiation. Judith greeted them politely. They didn't bother returning the favor. Daniel sat across from me. No folder this time. Just a clenched jaw and hands he didn't know what to do with. "We want to resolve this," Claire began. Judith nodded. "The apartment has been legally transferred. It belongs to Safe Haven Housing. It's not up for discussion." Mark exhaled like he was trying not to roll his eyes. "There has to be a way to unwind this. He gifted it without telling anyone." Judith turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I looked directly at Daniel. "You told me I didn't belong there," I said. "You said it was better off without me. That I was old and alone. That I didn't need it." Daniel didn't answer. I continued. "You moved in behind my back. You changed the locks. You laughed when I asked what gave you the right." Claire interrupted. "You never said you wanted it back." "You never asked," I said. "You took." Evelyn crossed her arms. "So you're what now? A saint? You gave it to strangers." I turned toward her slowly. "No. I gave it to someone who needs it. That apartment was full of memories, but it stopped being a home the minute you walked in and treated it like your weekend getaway." Daniel's voice was tight. "We made it better. We fixed it." I laughed once. "You replaced pictures. You threw out Margaret's plants. You poured wine on coasters I carved by hand. That place didn't need fixing. It needed respect." Silence. Judith slid a folder across the table. "Here's a certified copy of the deed, stamped by the county. I'd advise you to read it carefully. You are no longer authorized to be on the premises. Any further attempt to enter will be considered criminal trespass." Mark scowled. "So that's it? We're the villains?" "No," I said. "You're just not welcome." Daniel leaned forward. His voice cracked, just slightly. "You didn't have to do this." "Neither did you," I said. He didn't have a response to that. Judith closed her notebook. "Unless you have further legal questions, we're done here." They stayed seated for a few seconds longer, like their legs hadn't caught up with their shame. Evelyn stood first. Mark followed. Claire hesitated, then walked out. Daniel lingered. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since this all started. "You're never going to forgive me, are you?" I didn't blink. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether this is the end of your taking." He nodded, slowly. Like it hurt. Then he left. After they were gone, Judith sat back and took off her glasses. "You handled that better than I would've." "I didn't do it for them," I said. "I did it for Margaret. And for me." She smiled. "And for whoever gets to live there next." That part, yeah. That mattered too. Later that afternoon, I took a walk past the apartment. The rain had stopped. The sidewalk glistened in patches where the sun hadn't reached yet. A young woman stood outside the front door, holding a folder and a set of keys. She was maybe in her late 20s, wearing jeans and a second-hand jacket. She looked up at the building like it was a miracle. I didn't say anything. Just kept walking. But inside, something small and good nodded. The apartment wasn't mine anymore. And I didn't want it back. I wanted it alive. I waited 3 weeks before stepping foot back in the apartment. Not out of fear. Not hesitation. I just knew it needed to become something else before I walked through that door again. I needed it to shed the residue of betrayal, the sour taste of entitlement and voices raised in a place that once echoed only with laughter, late-night jazz, and the shuffle of slippers across hardwood. But one Thursday morning, I got the call. A woman named Sienna, coordinator for Safe Haven, asked if I'd be willing to come by. "We've moved in our first tenant," she said. "And we'd like to show you what we've done. After all, you're the reason this place exists now." I didn't say yes right away. I looked around my flat, the tidy, quiet little space I'd lived in since Margaret passed. It was comfortable, predictable. But it never felt like mine the way the apartment did. That apartment held blood and bone. Decades of it. "Yeah," I said. "I'll come." I arrived just after noon. The building looked the same, chipped brick, crooked mailbox panel, one window that never fully closed. But something was different. A potted plant stood beside the main entrance. Someone had placed a new welcome mat out front, too, one that didn't say live, laugh, love or anything stupid like that. Just come as you are. Inside, the air was lighter. No incense. No perfume. Just fresh, open window air. Sienna met me in the hallway. She was sharp, kind-eyed, and maybe 30. Wore jeans, a cardigan, and a sense of calm that made you want to confess things. She offered a warm handshake. "You're Walter," she said. "This place, wow. You built a beautiful home." I shrugged. "Margaret picked the colors. I just did the drywall." She laughed gently. "Come on. Let me show you." The living room was different. Not redesigned, just refreshed. My old recliner was gone, replaced by a second-hand couch with a throw blanket folded neatly at the edge. The coffee table was still mine. I recognized the burn mark from that time I left a cigarette unattended in 1993. But what really caught me was the sound. Laughter. Not a crowd. Just one voice, light, young, tired in that way only relief can make you tired. A woman stepped into the room from the kitchen. Late 20s. Black hair pulled back in a ponytail. A plain t-shirt, worn jeans, eyes that had seen too much for someone that age. She stopped when she saw me. Sienna stepped forward. "Walter, this is Janelle. She moved in last week." Janelle nodded, then smiled, not wide, not fake. Just a small, grateful curve of the lips. "You're the guy who gave this place to us." I guess, I said. It used to be mine. She looked around like she couldn't believe it. It's beautiful. It's safe. I sleep through the night here. I haven't done that in years. I nodded slowly. Then it's yours now. There was a beat of silence. Not awkward, just full. She excused herself a moment later, giving Sienna and me space. Sienna showed me the rest of the place. They hadn't gutted it. They hadn't even painted over Margaret's kitchen tiles. The ones she picked out from that little hardware shop off Avenue D, sea glass green. I'd hated them when she brought them home. But now, standing in that kitchen, I couldn't imagine anything else. Why safe haven? I asked. Sienna turned toward me, leaning against the counter. Because most shelters are just places to crash. They're not homes. We try to change that. We take transitional housing seriously. Dignity, security, space to breathe. That's the mission. Margaret would have liked you, I said. Sienna smiled. She sounds like someone I wish I'd met. She had a way of seeing what something could be, I said. Before I could. I just followed her gut most of the time. Well, she said, gesturing around. She'd be proud. I ran my fingers over the edge of the counter, still smooth, still slightly off level because I refused to use a level when I installed it. Is Janelle okay? She's recovering, Sienna said. She lost her husband 2 years ago. He was military. PTSD. She was living out of her car for a while. Jesus, I muttered. Now she's here. Stable. She's getting her nursing certification reactivated. We're helping with paperwork, interviews. She's got a long road, but she's walking it now. I nodded, blinking more than usual. That's good. I turned toward the window where Margaret used to drink her morning tea. The same corner where Daniel and I built a train set when he was 6. Where the light hit the tiles just right at sunrise. The light was still there. Brighter now. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by it. I felt healed. Before I left, I asked if I could sit for just a moment in the old dining room. Sienna gave me space. I sat alone at the table. No voices. No vengeance. Just quiet. And then, I pulled out my notebook, same one I'd used to sketch my first revenge plan. I flipped past all the anger, all the diagrams and tactics. I found a clean page and wrote. Sometimes the best revenge is giving something meaning again. I closed the notebook and stood. Letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant passing it on. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Not a hard knock. Not the kind you use when you're angry or demanding answers. It was tentative. Hesitant. 3 soft raps, spaced like the person behind the door wasn't sure they should be there. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Daniel. He stood in the hallway, wearing a faded windbreaker and holding a cardboard box. His face was drawn, older than I remembered. Not in years, just in wear. The kind of aging that happens when the pride finally runs out. Hey, he said. I nodded once. Hey. We stood in silence. The air between us was full of ghosts, Margaret, the apartment, every word we'd thrown at each other like stones. He didn't ask to come in. Just looked down at the box in his hands. I found some of your tools. They were in Claire's parents' garage. Thought I'd bring them by. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked in slowly, like the floor might collapse under him. Set the box down on the counter. I noticed the top was still sealed. He hadn't peeked. That alone said something. He didn't sit until I did. And even then, he didn't speak right away. Finally, he said, Claire and we're separating. I didn't react. Just sipped my coffee. She said I mishandled everything. That I cost us the apartment, and my inheritance, and her parents' future. She's not wrong. No, I said. She's not. He looked down. I was so damn sure I was doing the right thing. Taking initiative. Making use of space you didn't want. She kept pushing, and I let her. You didn't just let her, I said. You let her. You told me I didn't belong. His eyes tightened. I know. And I hate myself for it. For once, he didn't follow it with excuses. I've been staying with a friend, he said. Sleeping on a couch. The silence has been heavy. I looked at him, really looked at him. This wasn't a performance. This was a man whose scaffolding had collapsed. His certainty, his marriage, his pride, rubble. I visited the apartment last week, he said. Sienna let me in. I stiffened slightly, but he raised a hand. Just to look. I didn't touch anything. I just wanted to see what you'd done. I waited. She walked me through it. Showed me where Janelle was staying. Told me about the other applicants. Widows. Vets. Women escaping shelters. I saw the couch where Claire and I used to argue over decor, and I swear it looked warmer with someone else's blanket on it. He exhaled slowly. You were right. That place wasn't mine. It never was. I took it because I thought I was owed something. You were, I said. You were owed better lessons. That's on me. He looked up, surprised. No. That's on me. I was raised better than I acted. Silence again. Then, I'm sorry. It wasn't flashy. Wasn't followed by tears. Just said plainly, like something he'd rehearsed but meant. I didn't answer right away. I got up, poured him a cup of coffee, and slid it across the table. He looked at it, then me. That's it? He asked. No lecture. No, I said. That part's over. He took a sip. Winced. Still too strong. You never liked my coffee, I said, half smiling. Margaret used to say I brewed it with vengeance. He chuckled softly. She was right. We sat for a while after that. Talked about nothing important. Weather. The news. The price of gas. But under all of it was something we hadn't shared in years, space that wasn't poisoned. Eventually, he looked up and asked, do you think I could visit the apartment sometimes? Not to live. Just to help. Clean. Volunteer. I want to make it right, even if I can't undo what I did. I looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting a long line of gold across the wall. For a second, I saw Margaret standing there, arms crossed, smiling. I think that's a good idea, I said. 3 weeks later, Daniel joined a Safe Haven volunteer day. He helped paint the upstairs trim and replaced a broken cabinet door. Sienna told me he worked quietly, took direction, and stayed late to sweep. He didn't tell anyone who he was. Didn't bring up his name. His past. He just worked. We never went back to how things were. That'd be dishonest. Some things, once said, don't get unsaid. But something new grew between us, a mutual understanding. A slow rebuild. The kind that takes time. We started having coffee every Sunday. Some days we didn't say much. Some days we said too much. But every week, he came back. And every week, I let him. Looking back, I've learned something simple: revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, it's about reclamation. About saying, this is mine, not out of ownership, but out of meaning. Out of memory. Out of love. I didn't burn the house down. I turned it into a lighthouse. And in doing that, I didn't just punish the ones who wronged me. I found a way to let go. And somehow, I found my son again. Maybe not the boy I raised. But the man he's trying to become. And I'll take that. Any day.